Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest on how Brexit has cost our financial services industry in a way that has benefited not just EU financial centres but even New York across the Atlantic as well. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the plight of UK-based financial services in the news again, as it will be next month and the month after. The largest individual sector in our economy and the biggest contributor to tax revenues, and Boris Johnson is stuffing it twice. So, he intends to deregulate the industry, which means that our money will be less safe and they will pay less tax. We will be compensating for lost trade by boosting money laundering services, which don't provide jobs or tax revenues, because that's the point of it. And the second way is by shutting off market access to the legitimate business conducted here. Now, looked at objectively, you had the UK leave the EU's customs union and single market. If no deal was struck at all, none at all, we would be trading under WTO conditions which are so bad that literally no advanced economy on the planet does that with neighbouring advanced economies, or even ones sharing the same ocean. Oh, that is until now, until we were the first to do it. So you need a deal. Would you think that the government should have prioritised the most important industries in that deal? If you think the answer is no, wouldn't half like to hear the reasoning for that. But the government didn't because, of course, Brexit isn't about the national interest. It's about the interests of a handful of extremely wealthy individuals, many of whom don't spend a great deal of time in the UK, to avoid taxes. And I talked a bit earlier this year as to how, as a result of Brexit, other giants of the financial world actually have a better foothold in Europe than we do. London is by far and away the largest financial centre in Europe. Far and away. And Brexiteers bet that such was its dominance, it would bully its way to retaining its lofty position after a hard Brexit. Too big, they said. But I noted that New York now had better market access to the EU than London does. Now it's been reported that Wall Street is making an absolute killing from Brexit. They took the bulk of the £2.3 trillion loss in derivative trading during March. We lost £2.3 trillion worth of business in one sector of our economy in a single month because of Brexit. Now let that sink in. The total wealth of the UK is about £10 trillion. Of course, the amount of business that is handled by our giant of a financial service sector is truly eye-watering, but it has just lost an amount of business equal to a quarter of the value of the entire country in a month. Can't even cope with sums of money on that scale. 1 month? And if the EU not only don't grant further equivalent arrangements to us, but they actually take away the ones we do have when they're up for review in a couple of years, then that will only get worse. There was a view that London was so huge that it would weather the storm of Brexit. I've seen comments from those in the city that leading up to it were quite confident and now they're not so sure. See, it seems they didn't really believe the government were insane enough to prioritise agreements for the country's largest sector. They thought, well, no government's going to throw us to the wolves. What do you mean they've thrown us to the wolves? It turns out having mad dogs in charge of the country can be quite chaotic. Then last week, we also saw the news that major investment banks have been shifting more of their senior staff to European centres due to what was termed uncertainty of the UK's access to the EU's financial services market. Let's drill that down. Uncertainty of the UK's access to the financial services market. That is key, because it means that these banks need the UK to agree access to the EU. They need to do business with EU countries in order to be viable, and yet our government is making no moves to do so at all. The government's pathetic attempt has never risen further than telling the EU to give us equivalence because it will hurt them if they don't. Now, I'm not a banker, but I'm going to suggest that it's pretty hard to convince the EU that refusal to grant equivalence to the UK is hurting them badly when huge amounts of business are flooding into their financial services hubs. Offices have been moved across. Senior deal makers are now making the move. This is actually quite huge. All of the major bankers in Europe have been based in London, all of them. Yes, there were banks located around the EU as well, but the main business was done in London, and so that's where the biggest fish made their home. They're now moving out. Paris, Frankfurt, Milan. They've been the first beneficiaries, it seems, and it'll continue. This isn't just happening organically because of Brexit. The EU are aggressively encouraging it. Their regulators have been pushing banks to expand into the EU if they wish to maintain market access. The EU, for example, have required that bankers need to have a chaperone when meeting clients. This is naturally a massive ball ache. The solution is to base yourself inside the EU where this requirement disappears, which is what they're doing. And it's not worth our while trying to explore the justification for this rule. Do they need a chaperone? What's the justification for that? Why do they need it? Don't matter. There may be a justification. It may make sense, or it may not. Doesn't matter. International trade is like any other competitive aspect of life. It's quite cutthroat. It doesn't matter what justification there is for a policy, only whether you can do it or not. And how often do we say the EU is ruthlessly protectionist? People say, oh, the EU is protectionist, we need to leave it. Right, we're now on the outside of that protection. We took things for granted inside the EU. Now we're seeing what it's like being a third country on the outside. And the size of our economy is no protector. We are the second largest economy in Europe, for now anyway. And we have the largest banking sector in Europe. This is not enough to stop the EU draining it away. And the losses to America also work in the EU's favour as well. Of course, they'd have preferred to take all the lost business, but they don't have the capacity. I mean, that is also an indicator of just how much business is being lost to London. Europe can't actually take it fast enough. So, of course, some was going to be lost to the other giants around the world. But when you're in competition, I'll remind people it's the UK who chose to be aggressively opposed to the EU and continue to do so. It also doesn't matter, whether London loses its business to the EU or elsewhere. The fact is it's losing it. Every lost £1 trillion of business is shrinking London's power. One thing the EU genuinely did fear with Brexit is this huge financial centre, this Singapore on the Thames, just off their coastline. Well, this is all working to shrink London's power and therefore shrink its threat. I think Rishi Sunak's going to have to work on his patter on this one. Doesn't bode well for our international relationships of the immediate future when we have a government whose approach to deal making is to say, give us what we want. What do you mean, no? But we're British. Yeah, sod you then. And throughout all of this, you have to consider that this is a government who are promising to invest in the country at the same time as cutting taxes for those who can afford it, at the same time as shrinking our economy, meaning even lower tax revenues, with even lower employment, meaning even lower tax revenues, but higher welfare costs. Not entirely convinced that the man who messed up the pandemic and the economy, and continues to do so, is going to level up Britain like he says he will. I wonder how much value was wiped off our largest sector in April. We may have to wait a few more weeks to find that out. But until then, those are my thoughts. Hope you found them interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. Until next time, I'll see you later.